You're live, Senator.
All right, thank you. And thank you, everyone. I realize lunchtime is so precious, so for you to spend some of it going over the budget adjustment, but as our usual practice, it's very helpful to give an informal run through so that if you have questions or whatever, we can sort of understand them better. What I have is two, well, I guess more than two documents. I have our standard summary of what the budget adjustment bill looks like as we are going to vote on it this afternoon. This time what we did is try to incorporate all the changes that the House made and then in a kind of a blue-gray help you see the additional changes that were made in Senate appropriations. Along with that two-page summary of the BAA is a spreadsheet on ARPA funds. So people always ask the question, how have we been spending the funds and how much do we have still available as we're moving forward in budgeting? And then, of course, the addendum was on the web page as well as the web report, which has all the numbers. So I thought I would run through a couple of things. First of all, this budget adjustment is actually bigger than normal because we're advancing money for other activities than just simply truing up appropriations and the estimates and that were used that needed to be corrected. So normally it's much more technical, but this time there's some additional sums of money that are being appropriated. And I think probably housing would be the biggest of that. And so we have housing. And one of the things that was discovered by VHCB is that ARPA funds could not be used to leverage federal tax credits. And for that reason, the House put in some general fund as opposed to the governor's proposal. And the purpose for that is the general fund can be the leverage for those tax credits and therefore would allow more housing to be developed than would be the case if we used simply all ARPA funding. The other area that I wanted to bring up is if you look at the total spending in the Senate version, it is higher, but we are accounting for the $200 million that is going to be dealt with in the pension bill that's coming out of Senator White's committee. There was agreement last year, and we held in reserve $150 million to be a one-time payment to help address the underfunding of the pension system. In our negotiations, we added an additional $50 million. And so in building this BAA, we're accounting for the $50 million that would be added to the 150. So in the pension bill, you will see unreserving the 150 and a direct appropriation of that 50 million. And I just want to point out by making that one-time payment, it has a very substantial beneficial impact 2 years out on our amortized liability, underfunding liability payment. And that is all part of our construct to address the underfunding and provide an ongoing addition to the normal annual contribution. And I'm looking forward to that bill because one of the things that is really important about that is for the first time ever, we are dealing with pre-funding our healthcare benefits for our current employees for when they retire. And that's for both state employees and teachers. And the fact that we have not been pre-funding has resulted in about $2 billion of unfunded liability showing up on the state ledger. So this package actually will move us forward in substantially reducing those liabilities. So we are changing a little bit, but I want to let you know that the 200 million is definitely accounted for. We're also recognizing that we have a bill that deals, it creates the Vermont rental housing program. The House had included 20 million to go to fund the work. But last year we had money in the budget for it, but we didn't have the program policy, and that was identified as a real source of concern or even questioning on the part of Ledge Council as to whether those payments should have gone out. So we have taken the 20 million and will be appropriating that money with S210 and put together and have the policy and the money travel together and avoid the difficulties that we had last year. So one of the other areas that I want to bring out is we've had a lot of emails, sometimes on smaller things, but the news, we covered the move of the railroad station in New Haven. And it turned out, based on testimony in Senate Transportation, that the cost was $200,000 more than had been anticipated, and when we put the funding package together last spring. So this, the Historic Preservation Office has agreed to contribute another $50,000 toward that $200,000 gap, and we are covering the full cost. We thought if we paid 2/3 of the cost to get it moved, we should figure out a way of getting 100% of the cost of preserving that building. The other area that the House didn't do it, it was something that we had agreed upon in, and I think it just got omitted, was in the Health Reform Oversight Committee. We had some recommendations that were made by an independent consultant who has done a lot on healthcare costs. And it was her recommendation that we really needed to invest in an analysis to do some benchmarking of our healthcare system, where our costs are higher compared to other, either nationally or other states or other programs, or where we might be spending money for where we have overutilization, or maybe some services that are not that efficacious from a health outcome. So we are funding the cost, and that would be to the Green Mountain Care Board to contract with an entity to really undertake that benchmarking activity. The cannabis board was another area where the Senate spent some time. There was concern. The board had asked for 11 positions, and the House had included 3. Our committee, there was a lot of concern when you're starting up a new program. And before the bill came out of the House, there was a lot more administrative and other requirements that were added. And so that demands more staff. And the consensus of your Appropriations Committee is if we're going to set up this program, then we needed to do it, and we needed to have the resources. The last thing you wanted was to have maybe more applications than you could manage, or the work and the way in which it's got sort of initiated, and the support. We didn't feel that we wanted to jeopardize the most successful implementation that we could possibly have. So in the Senate, we added 5 more positions for a total of 8 out of the 11. The other ones are getting into enforcement, and they can come on a little later and would be done in the 23 budget. So we moved that ahead because there are no revenues coming into the fund at this point to underwrite the cost of getting it started. We thought in this environment where we had the money, rather than running a deficit and advancing money, it made sense to simply pay the cost of the commission for this year. And that was $850,000 that we added to do that, so that we fully address the special fund deficit. The other area where we thought now was the time to deal with it was also the internal deficit for correctional industries. That was almost $2 million. And so we decided that the more we can clean up and get our fiscal house in order, whether it be pensions, whether it be internal service deficits or whatever, the better it would be that we're in an economic environment and we're having revenues and federal dollars flow in that are so atypical, but now is the time to really make progress in that area. Even with what we did, we still have $81 million that is unreserved and undesignated to be used in FY23. And so that will help us look at other areas of state government that perhaps we need to do some more work in terms of where payments could be made. Now, the one thing that the administration had proposed, along with those internal deficits, getting them cleaned up, was to buy down 20 million of callable bonds. And so what we've done for the end of the year construct for 22 is to do two things. And one is to authorize any surplus. The first 5 million would go with the 5 million that's in the BAA to reduce by 10 million the property management fund deficit. And that 10 million has been carried on a note in our annual CAFR, and that would take care of it. And then the balance, there is a plan to get that deficit cleaned up. And then the 20 million we would, in callable bonds, we would also fund that in that surplus that we think will be available at the end of this fiscal year. The other area that I'd like to just bring attention to, and we're hearing it all over the place, and that's workforce. And I don't think that there's any area in Vermont in terms of workforce where there isn't a shortage. But there's a total of $60 million in the bill, and we did some reworking. We had quite a bit of discussion with the Agency of Human Services in terms of the different funding sources, but it's a total of 60 million that would go to really shore up our critical provider system in healthcare and human services or social services. So that money would go for workforce retention and recruitment. The House had limited the funding to just retention, but if you're working in an agency that's got a vacancy rate of 40 or 50%, you really have to have both initiatives to really deal with it, because you're paying a lot of overtime, workers are getting tired and so forth. So we felt strongly that in order to significantly address some of the pressures that these agencies and providers are experiencing, we had to really allow flexibility for the money to be used both for retention of the current workforce and recruitment. This is a needs-based approach. So just like the healthcare stabilization process, there would be an application process because there is great variation in terms of the need across the provider landscape. And so there would be a needs-based process, an application process, and then the money would go out once all the application deadline had been passed and all the applications had been reviewed. Also, we did have to put more money in to fund the side agreement that the state had negotiated with BSEA for Department of Corrections staff. In total, that was over $6 million. Some of it could be accommodated, but the budget has almost $5 million. Budget adjustment has about $5 million to fully fund that agreement. And then I know that there was some discussion and I know people have different views in terms of this issue, but the House had put in 1.5 million. They'd taken general fund from the legislative budget to do an RFP for planning an expansion of the State House. That led to some interesting discussions about how we could economize and why we didn't need as much space if we wanted to reduce the size of the legislature. But in the end, what we did was move the 1.5 to federal funds, and then we will let that planning sort of inform the next steps in terms of what's being done. And the pro tem has certainly been on record as saying, if we're going to do something now where we've got some federal money, is the time to really proceed with whatever is agreed upon in terms of addressing the needs of the State House, both in terms of public access and as well as adequate space for us to do our business. Needless to say, our agriculture committee was busy. Health and welfare was busy. Senator White's committee was busy. Senator Sirotkin's busy. Every committee, Senator Bray's committee has had some work associated with this budget adjustment. But Ag has come up with a way of providing some financial assistance to our dairy sector. Now, the House had added $2 million for working lands, but in the course of our Ag Committee's deliberations, they found out from someone from USDA about a dairy margin coverage program. And it really, it's an insurance, and you pay the premium. And if there's a gap between milk prices and feed, and certainly organic feed is very expensive, then this premium assistance would be paid out. And experience has been in the past that it's a fairly significant return for the premium paid. So we are appropriating from ARPA money, 2.6 million, to this sector of Vermont economy, and to provide what we think will be some significant financial relief based on the work that was done in Ag. The other area that I would bring out, and some of this is in language, and that is in section 54, we have another federal funding stream. It's called Emergency Rental Assistance Program, ERAP. It's over 300 million that's come to Vermont, and we're trying to crosswalk the FEMA money with this ERAP money that has to be used. Otherwise, it could be clawed back. And so this would be the funding stream to help us continue to provide emergency housing for Vermonters. And so this is language to set up that transitional emergency rental assistance program and access those federal dollars. And the reason it's really important is if we don't, then we lose access to about $30 million up for affordable housing initiatives. So you could say, well, why are you doing it? You've got FEMA, but if we use FEMA and not the ERAP, then there are the negative consequences of not using the ERAP 100% federal is that you lose access to that other funding assistance for affordable housing. And I'm going to be offering an amendment because there's a mistake on the date in that section, and it should be September 30th and not August 30th. And then let me see, the other thing that I thought was kind of interesting, because as we do things over the years, say, well, gee, what did that look like? And the reason that we have general fund to the extent that we are experiencing it here is because our revenues were upgraded. They were upgraded in July and again in January. And as our legislative economist said, when you put $10 billion of federal money into a little state like Vermont, we're seeing it. We're seeing it in terms of the revenues particularly in the area of consumption, tax revenues, and income tax. So in July, the upgrade was $190 million. And then in January, that was after you adjust for the property transfer tax, which was down a bit, not because people aren't buying homes, but because the inventory is really so constrained. That was another 40.5. So that's how we're able to fund so many of these things with general fund and still have 81 million in reserve to carry forward into 23 as we have more time for those budget considerations. I'm not going to go through all the list here because I always find it unnecessary. I want to, because you can read them yourself. But you can see that there's a lot of additional the crime victims money that was put in to address the revenue shortfall, money for municipal planning grants, which should help with some of the rental initiatives, particularly around zoning and other kinds of changes that might need to be made. And the other area that we are agreeing with what was proposed by the administration and the other body, and that is to pay off our TIB, our transportation infrastructure bonds. So you can see there's a lot of cleanup of debt, and the advantage of getting those bonds paid is it would free up about 2.5 million a year in debt service that could be available then to match the federal dollars. We have, through the infrastructure bill, a lot of money coming to the state, but it has to be matched. And the estimate is that the match, the amount of money that would be needed for the match is going to be over $100 million, maybe up to 125 million. So getting that debt obligation off the book is also helpful. So with that, I just want to make sure everybody has the documents that I've been referring to, the summary of the adjustment bill with the shading that identifies the areas where the Senate Appropriations Committee has made changes, and the ARPA spreadsheet that helps you see how that money has been spent to date and what's left. And then, of course, the web report. So with that, I'm going to just open it up and see if there's anything that people would want to ask me about relative to what's in the BAA. Senator Hardy?
Thank you, Senator Kitchell. Thank you so much for that excellent overview. I had a question about childcare. I see the 6 million, I believe, for retention grants for childcare, but an issue or concern that was brought to the Health and Welfare Committee was about the unused childcare assistance grant, CCFAP money, and whether or not that was going to be just removed or there was going to be a way to get that out to families.
That request to keep the money there was made in the House, and they simply went with the 6 million. The governor's proposed budget assumed, though, that money in building their budget adjustment request. So we did not add the 815 on top of the 6 million. That had been the request. And I think in the 23 budget, and Senator Westman can correct me, but there's almost moving the reimbursement up to 75% of the market rate and some other changes to give providers for 2 weeks vacation and respite is going to be about another $20 million. So that one-time savings has been used in other ways in building the budget adjustment, but it was not done to reduce the base. It was just, and you're going to see in the 23 budget a fairly significant investment in childcare. So what the House did was just add the 6 million, and we accepted that. We did not add on to that money. There's also an additional 29 million that was going out under ARPA that was specifically dedicated to the child care system as well.
Okay. Did you hear from them about whether they had overcome the technical difficulties they were having? Because my understanding is that one of the reasons there was this excess money is because of their technical issues with getting it out to families. And they came and testified to us earlier in the session that they were fixing that. So I don't know what the update is.
Where the technical fix I thought was related to the 29 million that was under ARPA to go out to this was based on the caseload being lower than was estimated for the budget. So it was a caseload true up.
Okay. All right.
And Senator Westman, if I don't have that right, but so the request was made right from the beginning, and what we did was concur with the House. They did not go back and adjust the 6 million or say, well, we'll take the 815 and add 5 million more. They just added a flat 6 million, and we accepted it.
Okay, but the 815 will be eventually spent in the FY23 budget on childcare.
Yes. Okay. And plus 20 million. I think it's a total of an increase of 20 million. Is that right, Rich?
Yes, and you also for next year, it isn't specifically childcare, but there's an extra 7 million for after school and summer programs that is in coordination with that. So the increase in DCF for next year will be almost $12 million in this area.
I'm sorry, it was 20. It was 12, not 20. I want to correct that. Thank you. I have to tell you, it's an awful lot of figures to try to.
A lot of numbers in the head.
Yeah,
all right.
A lot of.
Thank you both.
Yeah. Other questions? Okay. Oh, Senator Clarkson.
Jane, thank you for this. This was great and very helpful. I always find the work that you and JFO put together for us is super helpful. And you won't be surprised by my question, but given the speed with which yesterday afternoon happened and then into the evening, I'm just curious how the help for the 3 independent career and technical education centers worked out in your additional conversation. I apologize. I just don't know what you ended up deciding because their request was pressing from a budgetary point of view because they have to have the budgets passed by you're clear on the problem.
I'm very well aware of what the House did. What we have is 3 independent career technical centers. The governor's budget had proposed 1.5 million to be distributed across all the centers. The CTEs, the 3 independents, I didn't realize it at the time, but their latest, they wanted their share of the 1.5 plus this additional
576. Yeah.
The House gave nothing to the CTEs that were not the independents and gave the 576 to the 3. Right. We spent time, and the question was, because all the CTEs were using the same argument that they needed help because of COVID, they could not recruit students. And so we were looking at the governor's proposal to do a 1.5, and we were looking at how that, and our concern was the CTEs, the independents were saying they were different because they couldn't access ESSER money.
Right.
On the other hand, the non-independent centers could access ESSER money only through approval and the largesse of the LEA. And so many of them got nothing as well. So they ended up in the same spot as the 3 CTEs, just for a different reason. So in looking at this request, and we're going to have to take more time, and Senator Baruth is going to explore this, is what is so different about the 3 CTEs that they should get not only their their share, and we did move the appropriation up to 1.725
Yes, I know.
million. And that would warrant a different treatment. Now, they're saying they have, as a result of COVID and a lower student count, well, so did the other CTEs, and we're trying to figure it out. So what we have is the governor's proposal of 1.5 million. It was from the education fund to address the CTE situation, and to be distributed by average head count. We used that same methodology and we increased it to 1.725. On the other hand, the House only appropriated the money for the three and gave nothing to anybody else, and the other CTEs. And so we're going to have to work that out between now and when we go back to the House in terms of, is there something that would warrant providing a higher level of financial response to the independents as opposed to the other CTEs that didn't get a dime from their LEA. And and I didn't understand. So the House didn't add it to anything. They just gave it to them, the 576. We replaced it with a method that said we wanted to treat all of them the same and use the same methodology for the allocation. And then we got the response back that you obviously received. And so the highest, obviously the biggest amount of money goes to River Valley. And it's trying to understand what makes those situations, other than, the fact that that it would be reflected in their budget, but that would be true for, I would assume, other centers. So the answer is we're still trying to work it out.
And I'm happy to connect with Phil so we can maybe chat further about it. Thank you very much.
Okay. So that, any other questions? I'm just looking here.
Questions in general or?
Well, you mean related to the BAA? Yes. You have a question, Senator McDonald?
I had a question about agriculture and dairy farming, but I didn't know if this was the time to ask it.
Sure, I think so.
My question is very parochial.
I know what your question is,
Senator
Senator McDonald. I know what your question is, and it relates to the farm in your district where very unfortunately the cattle ate the scraps from the
Would it be,
from the cable or the wiring. And the answer is,
I don't want to take up your time to have you answer it twice, because I was planning to ask the question when we go to the floor.
well, the answer is, and I don't mind saying it twice, is there is no specific funding. We did not have a request, and that doesn't mean it can't be dealt with in 23. But I know that the Ag Committee has been taking testimony, and I believe Senator Sears also indicated from the Judiciary Committee around the liability and the damages and that farmer experienced as a result of the cable clippings that ended up being ingested by their herd. So, so the answer is we didn't have a request. I don't even know where and you'd have to create a program, or I don't know how that money would travel, but that can be, if that would take more time and could be considered in the 23 budget.
Okay, so I will thank you, and I'll ask the question when we go on the floor, and I didn't want to ask it as a surprise. So
no,
thank you very much.
Jane?
Yes.
Just on that last issue, Senator Hardy did bring Judiciary a bill, and we're finishing up work on it. And I believe after that it will go to Finance, but it doesn't speak to restitution for people. It's a regulatory bill. So that would be an open question in terms of money.
Okay. I knew that
My question was in
Judiciary
the
had
appropriations
taken it up.
sphere.
Other questions? I think, we tried that. It's obviously a lot of detail here, and that's why we tried to extract it and put it in 2 pages as opposed to having you pour through all the documents. And so I'm looking if there are no more questions. And it gives a little bit of break before we actually go on the floor at 1 o'clock. So to let you know, there were 2 areas where we needed to make a correction in terms of the recruitment and retention list of eligible providers through omission. Shared living providers did not get included, so it's to put that group in as covered or eligible. And the other was changing a date from August 30th to September.
Thank you, Senator Kitchell. This has been great. And I have to say, I'm sort of channeling the days of 2005, 6, 7, 8, when we had waterfalls that were just incredible. And this is making me feel very reminiscent of those days.
The only thing that I would say is we had waterfalls at the same time we were building deficits.
Yes.
And I don't think we knew that. I don't think, we knew that we had never set up pre-funding of our healthcare benefits for retirees. And I don't think we knew the extent to which the pension underfunding was growing. And that only really got addressed in 2007. So I think if there's anything for people who come after me, is the vigilance and the importance that if you try to postpone or underfund these obligations, when you have to deal with them, it becomes much bigger. It's sort of like, maintenance on your home and not repairing your roof or your foundation or whatever. So I think if you go through this, you can see where we've really tried hard to use this time to make the payments and get rid of internal service deficits and address getting buy down of loans. And then, of course, the underfunding, particularly with healthcare, is a big step forward when we do the pension bill. Okay, thank you. I guess.
I just wanted to make sure you let us know when you want to go off live because we're ready to turn off the live feed.
Yeah, I'm just looking for hands and I don't see any, Mr. Secretary. So I think at this point we'll go offline and reconvene at 1.